We will start with the beginner level. At this stage, we don't really care about the kick too much. The only thing that we need to make sure that it absolutely smashes the volume levels. And of course, casual drum rack or saturation just to make it a bit more aggressive, because everybody does that, right? The second thing is of course the bass, but we don't know much about the grooves and the different patterns and so on. We will just start with simple driving bass and then go to the serum and pick something sounding cool. The delay and the reverb is really important, of course. As we don't know much about the patterns, what we're going to do is just push them up and see if it works. This is the moment we realize that actually production is not that hard. So we will just put a drum rack with pressed install sounds and start the building stuff. We will randomly introduce some percussions. We are already halfway there, and at this stage I'm gonna be generous and give the beginner to do pattern that Fisher used in his synth track as well. When beginner gets a pattern like this is that they go oftentimes to just presets and pick one of the cool sounds that they found, something like this. And at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, we realize that we are actually the next Fisher. And we are going to keep playing this loop next 3 weeks until we get really bored. And once we really get bored, we really don't know how to advance. What really happens is that we kind of create a super simple loop like this, but the main idea is filling this space with some random effects that we find our sample packs. There's always some type of funky synth presets. You see how we are clipping everything? It doesn't matter, we don't care. Of course, this has to be contributed with vocal chops. And this is the point that you really start to have a lot of fun. And I think production should be that way, keeping that fun all the time. And then we keep going now. And more, even more, and of course more. And this is the point, like how do we know where to stop? And you only consider stopping when you see all these colors taking over the track and it really starts to look like a theme park. The snare rolls, the different type of risers and the white noises and cymbals. Let's take a listen how a beginner track sounds like, and then we can even comment some of the other mistakes that we see in this track. So first of all, it's actually quite fun track to listen to. But if we just summarize the main issues that most of the beginner tracks has is that they have really hard time to balance their low end. The kicks are oftentimes very loud. And the second thing, they are not really experienced with the bass sound, so they don't care about the groove. So this is like always the grit sounds of the bass makes it really a bit more robotic. The other thing is definitely they really don't use any return channels, or they don't know the concepts of the returns, so everything is just on the channel itself, all the reverb and delays. They don't care about too much about the mix, so that the sounds are on top of each other. The lacking sidechaining of the main elements also doesn't give the groove that we need. And there are a lot of effects, like I mentioned earlier, taking over the track. We don't really feel the groove from the main elements like the kick and the bass and the lead sounds and other groove elements, but we feel this constant risers or effects just try to keep everything on top. And this brings us to the next level.
House music.
Now we have reached the second level where actually we know what we are doing. Like this kick sound over here sounds cool. It's not really long, It's not really short, it has a good thumb, it has a good drive, perfect kick. There's nothing on it. And then we have a bass sound, and here we start to see a bit problems. The first thing, if you take a look at the groove, nice, cool groove bass, there's not much to talk about here. But the main problem, you often see the different layers of basses. This one was the sub, and you see kind of a medium layer, and then a high layer. Together, they sound pretty cool, to be honest. Because this is a tech house, you want to bring the groove of the bass sound without bringing too much top layers, because it will make the trio track more abusey. This will become more obvious once we bring in the other elements in the track, so I will come back to this point later on, but we will continue with the high end. And when it comes to the high end, we often see some things like this. So a lot of loops, a lot of layers on top of each other, and they sound pretty cool oftentimes, like this. To balance everything that you see, that a lot of EQing here and there, because we have a lot of sounds on top of each other, you need to EQ them to sit a bit more properly. But this high end is not really personalized for the track. It makes the track sounds like another tech house tracks out there. If I play together, it will be a bit more obvious. As these are the loops, it's harder to make different grooves out of them, so they're always same. And you often see this kind of less organic transitions, means that the patterns are not really changing to adapt to the groove of the sound. Another problem with this one, because we have a lot of layers, it also starts to overtake the overall groove of the sound, so we hear the bass groove less and less. This brings us percussions, and there's one thing that I really want to rant about the percussions, and it is the clave sounds. To be more precise, it is this clave, this sound. It is like we don't have any other percussion sounds and everybody has to use this sound. I know first time when you hear it, it is a really cool sound, it's a really resonant sound as well, so it really cuts through the mix, but for the love of God, use some different samples to make your track a bit more original. This brings us to another cheesy thing that I always hear in the pro producers, that they tend to have vocal chops, and it's always telling us or to the producers what's coming or what to do next. If you don't know what I mean, it sounds like this.
Feel the bass.
Or like this.
House music.
Like, this is not even the house music, but it is there, and things like this.
You ready? You ready?
So basically this type of cheesy vocals all the time, like house music, bugle the bass, let the drop go, let the drums crush your brains, whatever. It's always that type of stuff. And together with the track sounds like this. So sounds-wise, there's no problem, it works, but originality, I will say it's still lacking. And this brings me to our next problem with these pro sounds, is that the overuse of ARP sounds. But I often see that whenever a producer doesn't know what to do, they just make an ARP sound. An ARP sound like this coming from my Berlin preset and sample pack, really cool sound, and actually it kind of fits to the track, to the vibe as well. But it again comes to the point that we are really eating up from our groove again. Now I don't feel that groovy, like I am not really following the bass anymore, because it's really starting taking over the track. Because we are making a tech house, we really need to be focusing on the groove more than anything else in the track. And at this point we start to fill up the track like we did in the beginning track, like this. You will see that actually it's quite smooth. And the one thing that you can immediately comment, like, but this doesn't sound bad. Of course it is not, because this is a pro track, so it's supposed to sounding good. But it is not sounding as good as a Fisher track, right? That groove, that immediate catchiness doesn't exist in this track because a lot of things are going on. And the other thing that often lacks in this type of pro tracks is actually not really controlling your tails. So like we had the reverb with the long tails like this. And those long tails actually feels a bit too much the space, again eating up from the other things. And the other thing that we forget to mention, nice to take a look at, is that we have the same ARP, same melody here. Compared to the beginner track, this is much more controlled, much more fitting to the vibe of a tech house track, but it's still not really there. Again, it's a bit too fat, it's taking too much space, and having a bit too long tail makes everything a bit worse. But let's take a look at the pro level track and see how everything sounds all together.
Music. House music.
Sound-wise, the balance-wise, I think it's sounding fine, sounding good. It's a cool track as well, but it's not a track that you would immediately go back and listen to 10 times. It will be just like, oh, fine. Which means that we shall take a look at the track from the Fisher now.
I'm losing it.
So we have finally reached the Fisher level, and we are remaking a track from Fisher, the track that kind of terrorized our 2018. It was played everywhere, whole summer. It's called Losing It. So the first thing is kick. And to complement this, we have a bass sounds. Actually, the bass is quite simple, but there are some notes up and down, makes it a bit more gooier than it is. Together with the kick, you immediately feel the groove right ahead. It's just a serum patch. The main thing to make it a bit more groovier, a bit more resonant, I used the French LP and put a level of drive so that we had this like resonance peaks, giving this kind of organic feel, like a bass guitar feel into it. And we are complementing this with a simple clap. The only thing that's different here is actually clap having this super short reverse clap in it. So we have this original clap, and on top of that we have this reverse version, just filling up this initial sound coming right here, adding up the groove. And when it comes to the hats, we are really straightforward. We have just off hat together with open hat. Simple open hat, closed hat, together with the track. Let's put the BPM into the right as well. Do you see how we keep the groove simple so that it's really easy to dance to? For example, we are adding a percussion just made from the open hi-hat sound, shorten it up, we have this. And which leaves us to the most important sound in the track. At first look, it's a simple sound, but if you just try to listen a bit more, you can see actually there are different things in this sound. I don't know if you are hearing this initial hit there, but if I try to explain, the first thing over here is that you see the first note from our melody is taken away. So actually the upper layer, what I call, sounds like this. This kind of solved to distort the sound, so we have very short envelopes here and quite a bit unison on the oscillator A, and oscillator B is not unison, so stabilizing sound a little bit. Because this one has a lot of detune on top of each other. envelope 3, the very fast envelope goes on to detune, and even the noise levels. Distortion. Again, using the same envelope, and slight chorus and slight EQ. And on EQ side, I'm again using the same envelope to boost a bit the highs here. It's a quite elegant sound. I'm quite surgical for this with this one. EQing, what I'm doing here is just making the below 1000 Hz a bit less stereo and upper a bit more stereo. So balancing the sound that way. But what I considered first is actually automating the first note, but it was just too different. And the main idea here is taking the same patch, altering the envelopes, altering the unison, and getting a bit smoother sound compared to the other sound. Filter is different, envelope is different. We took off the oscillator B, so it's more stereo, more noise as well. It's like, why do we do this? This gives this really nice groove, like then. Take a listen. Try to hear it. And if you listen together now, see how this adds up to the groove. If you enjoyed the video up to now, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps a lot and it keeps me motivated to make more videos like this in the future. But let's jump back. The bass and the lead sounds actually working together as a team. Like when this goes dun 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 dun, bass follows along, so that we have this really nice focused point in the track focusing on the groove. We're just doubling up the notes. It's as simple as that. Again. Super simple, really. But these things really adds up when you have a very minimal track, right? And that brings us to crash plucks. We had a similar sound in the beginner track, actually. That's what I was telling you, that the difference between beginner and the Fisher probably is not the ideas. It's how you execute those ideas, so you can actually reflect what you have in your mind to the final product, that your final track. This is a nice example. So we have this siren type of sound without all these effects, sounds like this. The main idea is having this bit crash type of sound, putting a high pass filter and adding a chorus. Even more, the bit crash comes from the zero square here, distortion. This little sound comes from the second filter here. We have a very, very fast LFO here. It's like sound basically comes from this filter. And then we have this nice LFO here. You wonder why. This is just panning the sound right and left a bit randomly. Without effects. Rather than having this a bit more splice sound, focusing onto the one single area, which is being here. You can see that I'm putting a bit more distortion here. And then it's cutting off. And together with the track, and the rest is just putting up some effects and composition. So let's switch to the full track. So the first thing that is interesting when we look at the effects are actually, most of them are made effects. What does that mean? For example, instead of using white noise, I resampled the track itself with a lot of shimmer sound in it, sounding like this. You can hear all the small elements in the noise itself, so it just makes the white noise a bit organic compared to regular white noise. And then I added an operator. Operator in the fixed mode so that I can play with the frequency, so it goes that reverb sound. And to make it even more focused here, I took just serum and put a white noise here. The more important sound is probably this Fisher horn sound, by using just a cashmere horn sound like this. Sidechain the kick is a chip sound, but I layered it with a serum patch with the sawtooth. Synth sound, together they sound like this. serum patch looks like this. On both Pro tracks and the beginner track, there was just like splashes here, but this leads to a more organic sound. And the other thing, that rather than just using one kick and putting a lot of filters to evolve the sound, here I'm actually using 3 different kick samples. Samples being the exact same sample, so we have the original kick, and then we had the second version of the original kick, shorter version, sounding like this, so we can use in the back, and the third version here, a bit like a riser in that sense. And even the kick groove here changed a bit, like at the end of the 2 bar we have double kick. So we are using that short kick here. Again, you see everything is focusing on that tiny thing that is happening in the bass, lifting up in the track. I know a lot of small jams in this one, it's crazy. And there's that bass sound happening here like this. What I did, I put a utility and just boost up the sound 2 dB here, 2-3 dB, just and then going back. Together with the track, it sounds like this. Just a simple lifting the sound rather than trying to make it overcomplicated. And the same thing is actually with that crash sound that we had before. And here in the break part, we have this really dissonant version. Because envelopes are again slightly different here, so co-duplicate it, change the sound and use it there. So make it easier for myself really, rather than trying to automate too many parameters. And then we have this classic snare roll. Ambience at the break is actually built up by using the lead sound and sending it to the delay and crashing there as well. So we have this lead sound here that we remember. What we are doing here, all this build up is coming actually mostly from this lead sound. First thing that we are doing is we have an echo here and we are sending this sound right to the echo. And in the meantime, if we go to the echo here, you will see that there are a lot of parameters that are automated. The most important one is actually feedback. So we are feeding back more and more, so the sounds get more and more crazy like this. The first thing is feedback, feeding back more so that the sounds get more, and then we are feeding that sound into the volatile shimmer where we increase the dry wet more and more, so it gets wetter, more shimmerish, more shimmerish here. And then we have resonant peak that we made with the EQ8 and we are moving it right so that it gets slightly brighter. And then we are increasing the size of the shimmer so it gets bigger once we are getting close to the sound here. And do we have anything? Yeah, and the glue compression, because it gets bigger, it gets louder, so I'm using glue compressor to just compensate that loudness. Again, if you take a look. More feedback. More shimmer, size increasing, bringing down. So again, rather than just using a lot of white noises and stuff, we are getting a bit more creative. So the track sounds much more glued, much more together because of that. So let's do start the end and take a look what is happening. And yeah, that was it. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you learned something, and I will catch you in the next one. Goodbye.